I used to think we had the perfect life. My wife, Alyssa, and I. 7 years of marriage, no kids yet, but we weren't in a rush. We had dreams. Big ones. I ran my own small tech business, and Alyssa had just been promoted to a senior position at her firm. She was so proud, always talking about the support and mentorship of her boss, Richard. I thought it was endearing, even admirable, how close they seemed. Our mornings were a routine of comfort. Coffee together at the kitchen table, light teasing, and shared smiles. She'd kiss me on the cheek before heading out in her tailored suits, exuding elegance and confidence. I would watch her leave, proud to call her my wife. People envied us. Friends would comment on how we always seemed so in sync, so right. And I believed it. I truly did. Looking back, I think I missed the signs because I wasn't looking for them. Why would I? We didn't argue often, and when we did, it was over small, silly things. Like who left the dishes in the sink or why I didn't notice her new haircut. Normal things. Forgettable things. She'd been working late more often, but that wasn't unusual for her new role. She said Richard had high expectations and that she wanted to prove herself. I supported her completely, even when the late nights turned into weekends spent at the office. I didn't mind cooking dinner for one or eating alone while she texted me updates like, "So sorry, babe, but this project is crazy." Or, "Richard says hi. He's been such a lifesaver with this client pitch." I trusted her. I trusted her because I loved her. Because she was my wife. Because betrayal seemed impossible in a life we had built so carefully together. But perfection, I would soon learn, is just a mask. And masks always slip. Looking back now, I wish I could go back to that morning when she kissed me goodbye and I smiled like a fool, not knowing everything I thought I knew about my life would soon unravel. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. It started small, so small it almost passed unnoticed. A change in her perfume, lighter and sweeter than the one I bought her for our anniversary. The way she started dressing just a little sharper, even on days when she wasn't meeting clients. Then there were her silences. Alyssa used to tell me everything. Office gossip, her frustrations, even her little victories. But now she spoke less. When she did, it felt rehearsed, as if she were reading from a script. One night, as we sat on the couch watching one of her favorite crime dramas, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She lunged for it faster than I'd ever seen her move. It wasn't the message itself that caught my attention. It was her reaction. She smiled, a secret smile, and tilted the screen away as she typed a quick response. "Who's that?" I asked casually. "Oh, just work," she said, not even looking up. "Richard's losing his mind over this new project." I nodded and let it slide. It made sense. She was busy. Her boss was demanding. But it was the first moment I felt it. That nagging tug in my gut that something was off. The late nights became more frequent. Sometimes, she'd come home after I'd already gone to bed, slipping quietly under the covers as if she didn't want to wake me. I could smell faint traces of alcohol on her breath, though she never mentioned going out for drinks. "Client meetings," she'd say when I asked. "It's part of the job, you know that." And I did know. But it didn't explain why she seemed distant, why she flinched when I touched her shoulder, why she avoided eye contact during our conversations. Then there were the weekends. "Another work emergency?" I asked one Saturday morning as she hurriedly grabbed her laptop bag. "Yeah," she replied, barely glancing at me. "Richard wants me to go over the client proposals with him before Monday. He's being a perfectionist." She laughed, but it sounded forced. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was just stress from her job, a temporary rough patch that would smooth itself out. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to grow. I started noticing everything. The way her phone was always face down on the table. The new lingerie I hadn't seen her wear at home. The mysterious charges on our credit card for restaurants I'd never heard of. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid. After all, this was Alyssa, my wife, my partner. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. Until finally, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I remember the exact moment suspicion became something heavier. Something I couldn't shake no matter how much I tried to rationalize it. It was late on a Wednesday night, and Alyssa was still at work. I was cleaning up the kitchen when I noticed her work bag sitting by the door. She never left without it, not when she was heading to the office. I hesitated, standing over it like it was a live bomb. The thought of going through her things made me feel sick. It wasn't who I was, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, took hold of me. My hands moved before my mind could stop them. Inside the bag I found the usual, her laptop, some printed reports, pens. But at the bottom, something caught my eye, a receipt from a hotel downtown. The date was last Friday, the time stamped late in the evening. The charge was for 2 glasses of wine, a room service dinner, and this was what hit me hardest, a sweet upgrade. I stared at it, my heart pounding so loud I thought I'd pass out. Alyssa had told me she was working late at the office that night, sending updates about how exhausting the client presentation was. But this was no office. This was a luxury hotel. My first instinct was denial. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd gone there with a colleague for a work meeting. Maybe the room was for a visiting client. But the rationalizations didn't hold up under scrutiny. If it was work-related, why hadn't she told me? Why hide the receipt at the bottom of her bag? When Alyssa came home that night, I couldn't look her in the eye. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips cool and perfunctory. "Long day?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Exhausting," she sighed, kicking off her heels. Richard was a nightmare as usual. Her mention of Richard, her boss, sent a jolt through me. I'd always thought he was just a name, a figure in the background of her professional life. But now his name felt like a blade against my skin. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, clutching the hotel receipt in my hand. The doubt I'd been suppressing had grown into something I couldn't ignore. I needed the truth, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. The next morning, Alyssa left early, claiming she had an important meeting with Richard to finalize a client proposal. Her cheerful tone grated on me. It felt fake, rehearsed. I waited until her car disappeared down the street before heading to her side of the closet. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Proof? An answer? Closure? Her clothes were neatly hung, color-coded as always. But at the back of the rack, tucked behind her less-used winter coats, I found something unusual. A small black box. It wasn't hers. Alyssa wasn't the type to keep secrets, or so I'd thought. I opened it and found a pair of red lace lingerie, still with the tags attached. My stomach tightened. She'd never worn anything like this for me. It wasn't her style, at least not in the life we shared together. There was a receipt in the box, folded neatly. It was from a boutique downtown, dated 2 weeks ago. Another clue. My head spun with possibilities. Was it a gift for me? Something she was planning to surprise me with? But that didn't make sense. Why hide it? I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the box, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. I remembered her sudden late nights, the guarded look in her eyes, the hotel receipt. That evening, I decided to test her. When she got home, I casually mentioned that I'd seen an ad for the boutique downtown, the same one on the receipt. "Oh, I think I've been there before," she said lightly, without missing a beat. Her casual tone might have convinced me if not for the slight hesitation before she spoke. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A crack in her perfect facade. I didn't press further, not yet. Instead, I nodded and changed the subject, all the while feeling the weight of the box still hidden in the closet. That night, as I lay beside her, I replayed every interaction, every lie, every moment that didn't add up. The lingerie, the hotel receipt, the boutique. None of it made sense unless I was willing to accept the truth I didn't want to face. She was cheating. I felt anger boil inside me, hot and relentless. But more than that, I felt humiliation. My wife, the woman I'd trusted with everything, was lying to me, betraying me. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not without proof. I needed more than hotel receipts and hidden lingerie. I needed to see it with my own eyes. And so I began to plan. The days that followed were a haze of suppressed anger and careful planning. I didn't let Alyssa suspect anything. I smiled when I was supposed to, laughed when I needed to, and acted like the trusting husband I had always been. But beneath the surface, my mind raced. I decided to follow her. It wasn't difficult to slip a small tracking device under the dashboard of her car. It synced with my phone, discreetly pinging her location. Felt wrong, violating even, but I needed to know the truth. The doubt was eating me alive. That Friday, she kissed me goodbye as usual. "I'll be late tonight," she said, grabbing her bag. "Richard wants to go over next quarter's projections." Her words hit me like ice. She was lying again. "Sure, take your time," I said, keeping my tone casual. As soon as she left, I checked the tracker. She was heading toward her office, just like she'd said. For a moment, I wondered if I was wrong. Maybe she really was working late like she always claimed. But around 6 p.m., the tracker showed her car moving again. This time away from the office, toward the downtown area. I grabbed my coat and followed the signal, my heart pounding with every turn. She stopped at a luxury hotel. Parking a safe distance away, I watched as she stepped out of her car. She was dressed differently than she had been this morning. Her blouse was unbuttoned just enough to reveal the edge of a lace bra, the same shade of red as the lingerie I'd found. My hands clenched the steering wheel as I saw him. Richard. He was waiting for her at the hotel entrance, his hand casually resting on the doorframe. He smiled as she approached, leaning in to kiss her on the cheek. I felt the world tilt around me. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was real. It was happening. My wife, my Alyssa, was walking into a hotel with another man. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check. Storming in there wouldn't solve anything. It would only give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I took photos from my phone. Her with Richard, their bodies close, his hand resting on the small of her back as they disappeared into the lobby. Proof. When I got home that night, I felt hollow. The photos burned in my pocket like a brand. The weight of betrayal was suffocating. But beneath the hurt, something darker was brewing. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not without making them pay. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about power, control, and taking back what they had stolen from me. They thought they were untouchable, hidden behind their lies. But they had no idea what was coming. The next day, I sat in my car outside the hotel where I'd seen them. I didn't sleep the night before, and the rage simmering inside me was sharper than ever. I needed more than photos, I needed undeniable proof. Something that would destroy their lies in one crushing blow. At around 4 p.m., Alyssa's car pulled up to the same spot. She stepped out, her hair done, her makeup perfect, her smile bright. A smile I hadn't seen her wear for me in months. Richard arrived minutes later, driving a sleek black car. They exchanged glances that said everything, and then he handed the valet his keys. They walked inside together, side by side.
No rus, no hesitaschen.
It was routine for them now, something they'd done often enough to feel safe. I waited 20 minutes before entering the lobby, blending in with the hotel's well-dressed guests. I pretended to check my phone, my eyes scanning for them. The concierge smiled at me as I passed, oblivious to the storm building beneath my calm exterior. I made my way to the elevators and stood in the corner, acting as if I belonged. I waited for the numbers to light up, counting which floor they stopped on. The 12th. When the elevator returned, I stepped in and pressed 12. My heart was pounding in my ears, but my movements were calm and deliberate. If I confronted them now, it would be explosive, but it wouldn't be enough. Not yet. On the 12th floor, I stepped out and walked down the hallway, my footsteps silent on the carpet. I scanned the doors for movement, for sound. And then I heard it, soft laughter coming from behind a door halfway down. Room 1224. I didn't hesitate. I knocked firmly, my hand steady. The laughter stopped. There was a pause, and then a man's voice. Richard's voice called out, "Who is it?" "Room service," I said, keeping my voice low and professional. I heard shuffling, whispered voices. The door cracked open slightly, and Richard's face appeared, his expression cautious. "What is it?" he asked, clearly annoyed. I didn't give him time to react. I shoved the door open with all my strength, slamming it against the wall. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. And there she was, Alyssa, sitting on the bed in her red lace lingerie, the same one I'd found hidden in the closet. Her face turned pale the moment she saw me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Jack?" she stammered, scrambling for a sheet to cover herself. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice cold and sharp. "Funny, I was going to ask you the same thing." Richard tried to step between us, but I turned on him, my glare cutting through his bravado. "Sit down," I said, my voice low and threatening. He froze, realizing I wasn't playing games. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Smile," I said, snapping a photo of the two of them, her half-dressed on the bed, him standing there in nothing but his boxers. "This," I said, my voice trembling with fury, "is just the beginning." Alyssa tried to speak, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jack, please let me explain." "No," I cut her off. "You've done enough. You'll both regret this. I promise you that." I turned and walked out, leaving them stunned and scrambling behind me. The door slammed shut, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. I had everything I needed, and now it was time for them to pay. Driving home that night, I felt an eerie calm wash over me, the kind of calm that follows a storm, when the destruction has already begun, and there's nothing left but the promise of more chaos. My mind wasn't racing anymore. I wasn't panicking. I was planning. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city, replaying the scene over and over in my head. Alyssa's pale, guilty face, Richard's smug shock. Every detail was burned into my memory, fueling the fire inside me. They thought it was over, that I would storm out, hurt and broken, and eventually crawl back, willing to forgive or forget. They didn't know me at all. When I finally pulled into the driveway, it was late. Alyssa's car wasn't there yet. I sat in the darkened house, waiting for her. The silence was deafening, but I welcomed it. It gave me time to think. Around midnight, I heard her car pull up. The door opened, then closed softly. Her heels clicked on the floor as she walked into the living room, hesitating when she saw me sitting there, staring at nothing. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling.
I'm sorry.
I can explain everything." I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch, watching her squirm under the weight of it. Finally, she broke down, sinking onto the couch across from me. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake." "Which part?" I asked coldly. "The hotel? The lingerie? The lies? Or the part where you thought I wouldn't find out?" She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't interested in her excuses or her tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, sobbing now. "I never stopped loving you, Jack. I swear." "Love," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "Don't insult me, Alyssa. Whatever this is, whatever you've been doing with Richard, it isn't love." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "You destroyed us," I said quietly. "And now, I'm going to destroy everything you care about." Her eyes widened, fear flickering across her face. "What does that mean?" "You'll see," I said, standing and walking past her. "This isn't over." I left her sitting there, broken and terrified. The part of me that once would have felt guilt or pity was gone. She'd killed it the moment she betrayed me. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I started putting the pieces together. This wasn't just about making them pay, it was about making them suffer. I wanted them to feel the humiliation, the betrayal, the emptiness they'd inflicted on me. And I would stop at nothing to ensure they did. The next morning, Alyssa tried to act normal, as if her tearful apology the night before had somehow fixed everything. She offered to make breakfast, but her hands trembled as she poured the coffee. I watched her, saying nothing, letting her squirm in the silence. When I left for work, I didn't kiss her goodbye. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. Let her wonder what I was thinking. Let her wonder what I was planning. My first stop wasn't the office. It was a print shop downtown. I had all the evidence on my phone, photos, screenshots of texts she'd sent to Richard. Yes, I'd gone through her phone while she was sleeping. And even the audio recording from the hotel hallway. Technology was a beautiful thing when used for revenge. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions as I handed over the USB drive and requested a set of prints, along with a few hundred color copies of a carefully designed flyer. The flyer featured one of the photos I'd taken of Alyssa and Richard at the hotel. Their faces unmistakable, with the words, "Meet Alyssa and Richard, your friendly neighborhood adulterers." I added their office address and a tagline that read, "Is this the kind of leadership you trust?" It was cruel, yes, but it was just the beginning. The flyers would be distributed later, but first, I needed to hit them where it hurt. I emailed the photo evidence to Richard's wife. Yes, I'd done my research. She was a corporate lawyer, sharp and ruthless by reputation. The kind of woman who wouldn't just let this slide. Within an hour, I got a reply. "Who are you? And how do you know my husband? Call me immediately." Called her. The conversation was short but satisfying. She thanked me for the evidence and promised that Richard would regret every second of his affair. Step 1. Divide and conquer. That evening, I came home to find Alyssa sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She'd clearly been crying, but I didn't care. "Jack," she said softly, standing as I entered. "Please, can we talk?" I ignored her, walking to the kitchen to grab a drink. She followed me, desperate. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll cut Richard out of my life. Just don't give up on us." I turned to her, my expression cold. "You already gave up on us, Alyssa, the moment you walked into that hotel room." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. The pain she'd inflicted on me had hardened into something unbreakable. "This isn't over," I said quietly, watching her flinch at the words. And it wasn't. I was just getting started. By Monday morning, everything was in place. I had carefully chosen the timing, ensuring maximum impact. Richard's company had a quarterly meeting scheduled that afternoon. A big deal where the entire team, including board members, would gather to discuss the firm's progress and future plans. Alyssa, as one of his top employees, would be there. I arrived at the office building just as the meeting was set to start. Dressed in a plain black hoodie and cap, I blended in easily. Carrying a backpack filled with the flyers I'd printed, I went to work. I slipped into the bathroom on the second floor, just above the conference room. There, I carefully removed the ceiling tiles and placed several Bluetooth speakers, all preloaded with the audio recording I'd taken from outside their hotel room. Every laugh, every flirtatious whisper, every incriminating word. They were all there. At precisely 2:15 p.m., I hit play from my phone. The recording echoed through the vents, pouring into the conference room below. It was loud, undeniable. Richard's voice was unmistakable, as was Alyssa's breathy laughter and a line that burned into my memory. "You're the only one who makes me feel alive, Richard." It took less than 10 seconds for chaos to erupt. I watched from a hidden corner as people poured out of the conference room, some of them looking up in confusion, others whispering in shock. Richard stormed into the hallway, his face crimson, barking orders at his assistant to find out who the hell did this. Alyssa followed shortly after, her face pale, her hands shaking as she clutched her bag to her chest. She looked like she might faint, but I wasn't done. While the chaos unfolded inside, I moved to the parking lot, where I plastered the flyers on every car windshield. I made sure the front entrance was covered too, so every employee, visitor, and passerby would see the evidence of their affair. By the time I was finished, my phone buzzed. A message from Richard's wife. "Well done. He's going to lose everything." I couldn't help but smile. When I got home that evening, Alyssa wasn't there. I imagined she was still dealing with the fallout at work, trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. But there was nothing to salvage. I had ensured that, By the time she came through the door, it was nearly midnight. Her face was a mess. Smudged makeup, bloodshot eyes, and an expression of utter defeat. "You did this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I told you," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "This isn't over." Her tears didn't move me. Her pleas didn't soften me. She had made her choice, and now she was dealing with the consequences. But this was only the second act. The real punishment was still to come. The next morning, Alyssa didn't leave for work. She sat at the kitchen table, staring into her untouched cup of coffee, her hands trembling. I could see the weight of everything crushing her, but I felt nothing but grim satisfaction. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "I've been suspended," she said, not looking up at me. "Suspended?" I replied, feigning surprise. "Why would that be?" Her eyes flicked to mine, a mix of anger and desperation. "You know why, Jack?" Everyone saw heard. "Richard is trying to contain it, but the board's furious. Clients are asking questions. It's a nightmare. Sounds like you and Richard had quite the performance," I said coldly, sipping my coffee. Shame the audience wasn't impressed. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That same day, I received a call from Richard's wife. She sounded triumphant. "He's done," she said. "The board forced him to resign this morning. The divorce papers are already drafted. He won't get a penny." "Good," I said simply. That evening, Alyssa tried once again to apologize. She stood in the doorway of my office, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Jack, please," she began, her voice breaking. "I know I've destroyed everything, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll quit my job. I'll do anything." "Quit your job?" I said, turning to face her. "That's convenient, considering you'll probably be fired soon anyway." Her eyes widened, the truth hitting her like a slap. "Jack," she whispered, stepping closer. "I know you're angry." "Angry?" I cut her off, standing abruptly. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You think this is just about the affair? About you sneaking around behind my back with your boss?"
No, Elise.
"This is about the lies, the humiliation, the betrayal. You ruined us. You took everything we had and threw it away like it meant nothing." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. "And now you're paying for it," I continued, my voice cold and steady. "This is only the beginning, Alyssa. You and Richard thought you could get away with this, but I've made sure you won't. Not now, not ever." She broke down completely, collapsing onto the couch as sobs racked her body. I walked past her without another word, leaving her to wallow in the mess she had created. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. But deep down, I knew my work wasn't finished. Alyssa had lost her dignity, and Richard had lost his career. But they still had something left to lose, and I was going to take it all. Alyssa moved through the house like a ghost, silent and broken. Her suspension from work turned into termination within days. Richard's resignation made headlines, and his once bright career crumbled under the weight of the scandal. But it wasn't enough. I began dismantling Alyssa's world piece by piece. I sent the photos and recordings to her closest friends and family. The messages were anonymous, but the damage was immediate. Her mother called, horrified. Her best friend stopped answering her calls. She was isolated, cut off from the people she had leaned on her entire life. Richard wasn't spared either. I leaked the affair to his new potential employer, ensuring he wouldn't recover professionally. I wanted him to know that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a life-altering catastrophe. They thought they could keep their secrets. I made sure those secrets burned them alive. I waited until Alyssa hit her lowest point before delivering the next blow. One evening, I left a small package on the kitchen table for her. Inside was a copy of our prenuptial agreement, with divorce papers I had already signed. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Jack," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. We can fix." "There's nothing to fix," I interrupted coldly. "You broke it beyond repair." I stood, staring down at her. You'll walk away with nothing. No house, no savings, nothing but the shame you've earned. Her tears didn't matter to me. This wasn't a negotiation. It was my final act of control. I've already filed, I said, turning away. Good luck explaining this to everyone. Her sobs echoed through the house as I walked out, leaving her to face the life she destroyed. Just as I thought the dust was settling, a letter arrived. It was from Richard's wife. Inside was a folder, thick with documents. Curious, I opened it, and what I found floored me. Richard and Alyssa hadn't just been carrying on an affair. They'd also been funneling money from their company, padding their salaries with funds meant for clients. They were partners in more than infidelity, they were criminals. The evidence was damning. Bank statements, email chains, even photos of lavish dinners they charged to fraudulent accounts. My anger reignited, hotter than ever. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. They had lied to everyone, not just me, and profited off it. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I smiled as I picked up my phone and made the first call, to a reporter I knew would eat this story alive. The article hit the headlines within 48 hours. Scandal deepens. Former executive and employee exposed in financial fraud scheme. Richard's face was plastered on every news site, and Alyssa's name wasn't far behind. The story detailed every misstep, every fraudulent transaction, and tied their affair to the misuse of company funds. Within hours, Alyssa's phone began ringing off the hook. Reporters, former colleagues, even law enforcement. The walls were closing in on her and Richard, faster than they could react. The final blow came when the police knocked on our door. They handed her a summons, her trembling hands clutching the paper as she stared at me in horror. "You did this?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "No," I said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "You did this to yourself." She had nothing left, no career, no reputation, and soon no freedom. Richard was facing criminal charges, and she was next in line. I had taken everything from them, and for the first time since it all began, I felt a sense of justice. But I wasn't staying to watch the fallout. I'd done my part. It was time to walk away. I left the house that same night, carrying only a single bag. I didn't look back as I closed the door behind me. Alyssa was broken, left to face the wreckage of her choices. Richard, too, was spiraling, his career and reputation obliterated. They had taken so much from me, but now I had taken everything from them. Sitting in my car, I stared at the horizon. A strange mix of emptiness and relief settling over me. Revenge had been my fuel, but now that the fire had burned out, all that remained was silence. Was it worth it? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I'd escaped their lies, their betrayal. I was free. As I drove away, leaving the life I once knew behind, I realized one thing. I would never be the same. Betrayal changes you, but so does revenge. And maybe, just maybe, that was the price of closure.